Some things, once you hear them, you can never unhear.
Almost cried out Epstein Island. And I went, oh, okay. Now I understand what we're up against.
That one line, that one moment in a movie theater, that's what cracked it all open, because Jim Caviezel wasn't just making a film. He was pulling on a thread, and what unraveled behind it involves some of the most powerful, most beloved names in Hollywood.
Is just the beginning of this whole thing. It's an 8-armed octopus. And if you take just out, that arm will grow back. You have to take the head.
He's not talking about some fringe conspiracy. He's talking about a network, a system with names attached to it. Names you know, names you trust, names that have been smiling at you from your television screen for decades.
You know they eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
Let's start with who Jim Caviezel actually is. Because before you can understand why what he's saying matters so much, you need to understand what it cost him to say it. This is not some anonymous whistleblower reading off a script in a room full of barking dogs. This is a man who played Jesus Christ on the biggest screen in the world. A man who was at the absolute peak of Hollywood and then deliberately walked away from all of it to make a film that the entire industry tried to bury. Sound of Freedom is based on the true story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who left his career behind to personally rescue children from trafficking networks operating across Latin America and beyond.
The guys would come up, and they were, right in front of us, ask us if we wanted niñas or niños, and little boys or little girls.
And that wasn't a scene from the movie. That was real life. That happened to Jim Caviezel and his crew on the ground in Colombia in broad daylight. Children being sold in front of a film crew like it was a market transaction. And when he came back to Hollywood with this film, a film about saving kids, the industry didn't celebrate him. They blacklisted him.
Everyone was told, from Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio, look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done. You'll be finished in 3 years.
Read that back slowly. Every major studio, every major network told, not asked, told to stay away from a movie about rescuing children from trafficking. And most of them obeyed. Why? That's the question Caviezel has been asking publicly for years. And the answer he keeps arriving at involves names. Specific names. Names like Oprah Winfrey. Names like the circles that surrounded Jeffrey Epstein. And when you start mapping those names against what witnesses are now saying happened on that island and in private estates across America, the picture that emerges is one of the darkest things you will ever look at. Let's talk about the Epstein files, because this is ground zero for everything we're about to unpack. When those documents were finally unsealed, the public expected a few familiar names. What they got was a sprawling list of celebrities, politicians, producers, and philanthropists. People who had built entire public personas on being the good guys, the helpers, the humanitarians. And Oprah Winfrey's name appeared in those files not once, but 5 times. 5 times. Now, here's where it gets layered. Because Oprah's silence isn't new. Her silence is a pattern. And Jim Caviezel has been one of the few public figures with the platform and the courage to point directly at that pattern and name it for what it is. Think about the trajectory here. In 2007, Oprah opens a school for underprivileged girls in South Africa. It's praised globally. She's celebrated as a hero, and then almost immediately horror stories start leaking out. A dormitory matron is arrested. 14 counts of indecent acts against underage students. A lawsuit follows. A settlement is reached behind closed doors. No public details. No real accountability. The matron is eventually acquitted on contradictions in witness testimony, and Oprah simply moves on. No investigation, no transparency, no answers for the families of those girls.
Emphasize it, not a dollar has been wasted.
Not a dollar wasted. But what about the girls? What happened to them? Because sources close to the situation have spoken about missing students, about whispers on school grounds that nobody in power has ever officially addressed. And when you're a billionaire with the resources to find the truth, your silence isn't neutrality, it's a choice. And then there's Ellen DeGeneres, because her name didn't just surface in gossip circles. It came up in conversations directly tied to the Epstein network. People who claim proximity to these elite circles are describing something that sounds impossible until you realize how many separate voices are saying the same thing. Multiple accounts now describe Ellen as someone who didn't just attend the parties, but who participated in rituals designed to bind people together, a shared secret, a shared act so extreme that once you were in, you could never speak out.
There was a separate kitchen on her property, stainless steel, private entrance. No security cameras inside.
A private kitchen, no cameras. A personal chef who handled everything except the main course, which Ellen insisted on preparing herself. And witnesses describe her framing it not as something grotesque but as something sacred, something ancient, something powerful. Now, we need to talk about the part of this story that most channels won't touch. Because beyond the trafficking, beyond the rituals, there is a specific reason according to multiple witnesses across different circles why the most powerful people in Hollywood have been participating in these practices for decades. It's not just about power. It's not just about control. It's about something far more primal, youth. Jim Caviezel has spoken about a culture within Hollywood's upper tier. A culture rooted in the belief that vitality can be literally consumed, that youth can be transferred, that there are biological properties in young human tissue that the ultra-wealthy have been quietly accessing for generations through channels that never appear in any public record.
She believed consumption was transformation, that youth could be taken in, that vitality could be absorbed. She talked about ancient rites, about elites throughout history who understood what the masses didn't.
Ancient rites, elites throughout history. This isn't a modern invention. And that's exactly the point being made here. The claim isn't that Ellen DeGeneres invented something new. The claim is that she was initiated into something very, very old. A tradition passed down through circles of power. A tradition that requires absolute secrecy and absolute complicity. And here's the chilling mechanism of how that complicity works. Once you participated, knowingly or unknowingly, you were bound because what you had consumed made you as guilty as the person who served it. Nobody at that table could ever speak without destroying themselves. That's not just a social dynamic. That's an engineered trap. And it's been described by multiple sources as the single most effective way the elite class has protected its secrets for generations.
Once you shared that secret, whatever you believed you'd consumed, you are bound to the group. No one betrays a circle that can destroy them.
Read that again. No one betrays a circle that can destroy them. This is why Caveizel's 8-armed octopus metaphor is so precise. You don't just cut off an arm. You have to take the head because every arm, every individual in that network is simultaneously a victim of the system and a protector of it. They are trapped and they know it. And the people at the top designed it that way on purpose. Now, let's connect this to the skin because this is where the Epstein Island component ties directly into what witnesses are describing about Hollywood's anti-aging obsession. Sources describing conditions on Epstein's Island and in associated private estates across the United States have referenced procedures, treatments, things that happen to children on that island that go beyond trafficking in the conventional sense. Things that involve the extraction of biological material specifically from young bodies for use in treatments designed to preserve the appearance and vitality of the adults who funded those visits. The mainstream medical community has begun openly discussing compounds derived from young blood adrenochrome-adjacent research plasma transfusion trials stem cell protocols as legitimate anti-aging science. What witnesses are describing is the black market version of that science. The version that doesn't require ethics boards or clinical trials. The version that requires an island with no cameras and a very short guest list.
I believe it's going to move a lot of whistleblowers to come forward, but not one. In the hundreds, maybe thousands of them worldwide start coming forward and telling the truth of what's really going on.
Hundreds, thousands worldwide. That's not the language of someone talking about a small operation. That's the language of someone who knows the full scope and is bracing the public for what's coming. Let's go deeper on Oprah because her role in this story isn't simply that of a wealthy person with suspicious associations. According to Jim Caviezel, her role is structural. She is, in his words, the gatekeeper. Think about what that actually means in practice. Oprah Winfrey has more cultural influence than almost any individual in American history. She has decided which books people read, which doctors people trust, which politicians people vote for, which spiritual healers people follow, and which stories people never hear about. She put Harvey Weinstein on her arm at every major industry event for decades. She introduced him to young actresses. She lent him the most powerful social credential in Hollywood, her personal endorsement, at a time when dozens of women were already suffering because of him.
Had Oprah Winfrey there with him, who entered the room and was swinging off his arm and just seemed like a very dear friend. And these, like Oprah, Naomi, Rita, and Georgina, they all sat at his table. And for me, meeting Oprah was like, oh my God, like I would have thought that I would have to be someone who's established who everyone would have had to know about before I was privileged enough to meet someone like Oprah. So that gave me so much confidence in him at the time when he approached me.
That young woman trusted a predator because Oprah was standing next to him. That's not a coincidence. That's a mechanism. And whether Oprah knew exactly what she was enabling or not, at a certain point, ignorance stops being a defense and starts being a choice. She did the same thing with John of God, a Brazilian faith healer. She promoted to millions of viewers across multiple appearances on her show. A man who was later convicted of serially assaulting dozens of women. A man whose background any basic researcher could have flagged in an afternoon. And yet Oprah gave him a global platform, a stamp of legitimacy and access to her audience's trust.
Just go to bed, wear white, just wear everything is white, drink the water, take the herb.
And then there's Diddy. Oprah was a fixture at his events. She was photographed, praised, celebrated in those circles. The same circles that are now the subject of federal investigations so serious they have shaken the entire entertainment industry to its foundation. Now, let's be precise about what Caveizel is actually alleging here because this is important. He is not saying Oprah is simply a person who made bad friends. He's saying she is a node in the network, a legitimizing force, the human infrastructure that makes predatory systems appear safe, trustworthy, and even aspirational to the public. Harvey Weinstein, John of God, Diddy Epstein's files, the South African school. The pattern is identical every single time. Proximity, validation, silence, rebrand, and then perfectly timed to redirect public attention, the philanthropy surge, the Maui fundraising, the Golden Globe speech about believing survivors, the Me Too pivot. Every time the heat gets close, Oprah doesn't run, she rebrands. She becomes the solution to the very problem she was part of creating. Now, we need to talk about what happens to people who try to speak. And he was Ellen DeGeneres' girlfriend throughout the late 1990s. Theirs was one of the most publicly visible relationships in Hollywood at the time. Celebrated, photographed, put on magazine covers, the perfect progressive love story. But witnesses close to and in the years after the relationship ended described a very different private reality. Sources who claim to have worked alongside and on a documentary about child trafficking in a project called Children of the Machine have described her as someone who had witnessed things during her time with Ellen that she spent years trying to process. Things she could barely articulate. Things that when she finally started putting them into words for the documentary apparently made her a liability to very powerful people.
She didn't go through hell for nothing. We'll get it out there.
In August 2022, and he died following a fiery single-car crash in Los Angeles. The crash was spectacular. Her car traveling at high speed, slamming into a residential structure and erupting in flames. Toxicology reports indicated the presence of drugs in her system. The official conclusion was accident, but people close to and sources within the documentary team have been vocal about their belief that the timing of that crash was not coincidental. That and had been getting too close to information that certain very powerful people needed buried.
That crash wasn't random. It was a hit to shut her up. And the poison started way before, in her relationship with Ellen.
Now, we are not stating this as confirmed fact. We are reporting what witnesses are saying, what the people closest to and believed in the aftermath of her death. And we are placing it in context because when you understand the broader pattern Caviezel has been describing the question of whether powerful people silence inconvenient witnesses stops being a paranoid fantasy and starts being a documented, historical reality. Epstein himself died in federal custody. His death was officially ruled a suicide. His cellmate was conveniently transferred the night before. The security cameras outside his cell malfunctioned simultaneously. And the man who knew more names than anyone in the history of modern elite scandal took every single one of those names to his grave. That's the world Jim Caviezel is describing. That's the world he's been standing in front of cameras talking about at personal cost, at professional cost, at what he clearly believes is potential physical cost. Because Jim Caviezel isn't just exposing a past. He's predicting a future. And his predictions have been getting increasingly specific. At conferences across the country, gatherings of people who have been paying attention to the Epstein fallout, to the trafficking data, to the disappearing border children, Caviezel has been describing what he calls the event, a divine reckoning, a storm of all storms. He's positioning the Epstein documents not as an ending, but as a trigger, the last domino before a cascade of arrests, exposures, and institutional collapse that he believes is already in motion. And here's what makes that prediction impossible to simply dismiss. Over 300,000 children under 18 have been pulled into trafficking operations in the United States alone. Approximately 85,000 children who crossed the southern border in recent years have simply disappeared. No follow-up, no records, no answers from anyone in power.
85,000 children across the border this last year and disappeared. Where did they disappear?
Where did they go? That is not a rhetorical question. That is an open criminal investigation. And every name in the Epstein files, every person on those flight logs, every attendee at those private dinners, every guest in those estate basements is a potential answer to that question. Caviezel has said publicly that he believes the saints themselves would want to be alive on this earth right now because there are more souls to save at this moment in history than at any previous point in human civilization. That's prophetic language. That's the language of a man who genuinely believes he is standing at a hinge point in history.
I know that the saints in heaven wish to be on this earth right now because there are far more people on this earth than there's ever been. And there are far more souls to save right now than there ever has ever been.
And whether you share his spiritual framework or not, the facts underneath his fury are real. The files are real. The names are real. The missing children are real. A pattern of silence, complicity, and institutional protection is real. The question Caviezel is really asking, the one he's been asking since before most people were paying attention, is simple, and it lands like a verdict. They'd be in jail. But Oprah isn't in jail. Ellen isn't facing a public inquiry. The circles Caviezel is describing are still intact, still protected, still operating behind the same walls of money and media influence that have shielded them for decades. Jim Caviezel told us this film would move whistleblowers. He told us hundreds, maybe thousands would come forward and slowly, painfully, at great personal risk, they are. Children of the Machine is still being finished. The team and he was working with, reportedly still underground, still building the case, has said they will release it no matter what. And when they do, the names you've heard in this video will not be the last ones. They'll be the beginning. Stay locked in because this story is not over. It is just getting started.